Ever wonder who calls the shots when a big business in India is on the verge of going belly up?
Hmm. Interesting question.
Well, today we're doing a deep dive into this powerful group you've probably never heard of, India's Committee of Creditors.
Ah, you mean the COC?
Yeah, exactly. You've sent over some really interesting articles on this.
Yeah, it's a pretty new concept for India. And it's really important, too, because it gets right to the heart of how the country is dealing with corporate distress in the 21st century.
For sure.
Yeah.
The notes you sent over mentioned outdated laws being replaced. Sounds like India's really stepping up its game, trying to become a major player in the global economy, right?
Exactly. And a key part of that is having a robust system for handling insolvency. I mean, you can't have a healthy market economy without a clear and efficient way to deal with companies that are, well, struggling financially.
Makes sense. So, out of these sources I have here, there's this old Sikh Industrial Units Act of 1987, the SICA. Apparently, that was India's main tool for dealing with this for a long time. What was wrong with it? Why wasn't it working?
Okay, so think about like imagine trying to fix a modern smartphone, with all the latest tech.
Right.
But you're using this rusty old toolbox from your grandfather's attic.
Okay, I get it.
The tools just don't match the task. The Sika, it was created for a different era, and it simply couldn't keep up with the complexities of India's rapidly growing, constantly evolving market.
Okay, so new problems require new solutions, which is where this Insolvency and Bankruptcy Code, the IBC, comes in, right?
You got it. 2016 was a turning point. The
Yeah.
IBC, it's a complete overhaul of India's insolvency framework. They drew inspiration from, best practices from around the world.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and a group of experts, the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee, did a ton of research, and their main goal really was to give creditors a much stronger voice in the process.
Creditors being the ones who are owed money, right? Like
Yeah.
banks, financial institutions, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They're the ones with the most on the line, financially speaking, when a company goes under. So the IBC puts them front and center through this Committee of Creditors.
The COC sounds kind of mysterious, like a group of financial masterminds making these big life or death decisions for struggling businesses.
Well, it's not too far off. The COC is formed as soon as a company defaults on a significant debt. We're talking a serious chunk of change here, over 1 crore. And here's the key thing. The COC is made up exclusively of financial creditors. Think banks, financial institutions, the big lender.
Wait, so if I'm a small supplier who's owed money, or even an employee of the company, I don't get a say in this?
That's one of the criticisms that's been leveled against the IBC. It creates this sharp distinction between financial creditors and what are called operational creditors. Suppliers, employees, even customers, sometimes they all fall into that category.
And the logic behind that being?
So the Bankruptcy Law Reforms Committee argued that financial creditors are in a better position to assess a company's long-term viability. They have the financial expertise, you see, to decide whether a rescue is even possible or if it's time to, cut their losses.
Interesting. So it's all about figuring out if the company is worth saving or if it's headed for a crash landing. But leaving out those operational creditors, I don't know, doesn't that seem a little imbalanced? After all, those smaller businesses and employees often take the biggest hit when a company goes under.
You're hitting on a major point of contention. Critics argue that this exclusion creates a system where the little guy is inherently disadvantaged from the start. Some even point to specific cases, like Videocon Industries, for example. The operational creditors there ended up with a 99% haircut on what they were owed.
Ouch. A 99% haircut. That's like getting a single penny back on a dollar.
Exactly. That kind of drastic outcome has fueled calls for more transparency and accountability from the COC. There are even discussions about creating a formal code of conduct to ensure things are fair for everyone involved, not just the big players.
So, right now, there are no real rules governing how the COC operates.
Well, they have to operate within the framework of the IBC, of course, but there's no specific code of conduct as of today. However, the Insolvency and Bankruptcy Board of India, or the IBBI, they're aware of these concerns, and they've actually put out a discussion paper proposing some guidelines.
Yeah.
It talks about things like ensuring COC members act with integrity and objectivity, and even mandates active participation in meetings so that everyone's voice is heard, at least in theory.
So it's like they're trying to establish some ground rules, make sure the COC is playing by the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Which makes sense, especially given the amount of power these guys have.
Right.
One thing I don't quite get, though, this whole commercial wisdom thing,
Yeah.
it sounds almost, I don't know, mystical.
Right, like some secret society. It's not magic, though it might seem that way from the outside. Essentially, commercial wisdom refers to the co-pile's ability to make judgments, based on their experience and understanding of financial matters. And the courts in India, they give those judgments a lot of weight.
So if the COPI says, yeah, this company's worth saving, the courts are likely to just go along with that.
More or less. There's actually a legal precedent for this. There was a case, K. Sashidhar versus Indian Overseas Bank. The Supreme Court actually upheld the COC's decision in that case, stating that they weren't going to second-guess the COC's commercial wisdom.
Wow. Okay, so that's a lot of power. But, like with any superhero origin story, with great power comes
Great responsibility. Right.
data.
And you're absolutely on point there. The Coton's decisions, they don't exist in a vacuum. You know what I mean? They have a ripple effect on everyone, from the creditors themselves, obviously, to the employees, the suppliers, even the local community where the company operates.
It's like they're holding the fate of an entire ecosystem in their hands.
Precisely. Which is why that commercial wisdom is so important. They need to be able to look beyond just the numbers on a balance sheet. They need to consider the company's long-term viability, its market position, the strength of its leadership.
So it's not just about rescuing a sinking ship. It's about, charting a course for a sustainable future.
Exactly. And it's actually interesting to contrast the Indian approach with, say, the U.S. Bankruptcy Code. One of the articles you shared highlighted that the COC in India is supposed to focus on realistic and grounded predictions, not overly optimistic projections.
Interesting.
Yeah, they're looking for a path to genuine recovery, not just a temporary bandage.
Makes sense. But all this talk of, commercial wisdom and powerful decision-making, does it ever cross the line? What's stopping the COC from making decisions that might be good for the bottom line but not necessarily legal?
That's a critical question, and you're right, it's not a risk-free system at all. There have been cases where the COC's decisions have been challenged in court, for potentially overstepping legal boundaries. The J.P. Kensington versus NBCC case is a good example of that.
So there are checks and balances in place.
Absolutely. The courts have shown they're willing to step in if they believe the COC is, exceeding its authority or acting against the spirit of the IBC.
That's reassuring. It sounds like this whole COC system is a bit of a work in progress then.
Yeah, for sure.
A balancing act between, giving them the power to make these tough decisions, but also keeping them within the lines of the law.
That's a great way to put it. The IBC is still relatively new, and its interpretation is constantly evolving through court judgments and amendments. The debate about the COC's powers, the need for greater transparency, and, the potential for conflicts of interest, that's all very much alive.
It's like they're writing the instruction manual as they go, figuring it out along the way.
Mm-hmm.
What does this all mean for our listener, though? Like someone who might be thinking, okay, this is a fascinating deep dive, but what does it have to do with me?
That's a fair question. I think the thing is, understanding how the COC works, it's essential for anyone who's involved in the Indian business world at all. Whether you're a lender, an investor, even an employee or a supplier, the decisions made by the COC, they can have a very real impact on your livelihood.
It's like you need to understand the currents before you dive into the ocean.
Yeah, exactly. It's like you don't want to just jump in blindly.
Right.
Even if you're not a financial expert, just having this basic understanding of how this system works, it can help you make, more informed decisions, protect your own interests, especially now as India kind of continues its economic transformation.
So the stakes are pretty high for everyone then.
Absolutely. The success or failure of this whole IBC thing and the COC's role, within that, it's going to have long-lasting consequences. It's all about finding that sweet spot,
Yeah, finding that balance.
Exactly. Protecting creditors' rights, but also giving struggling businesses a chance to actually recover. And then, of course, ensuring fairness for everyone involved. It's tricky.
It's like a multidimensional puzzle trying to get all the sides to line up. So knowing what we know now, what's the key takeaway for our listener? What should they be paying attention to, especially as this whole system continues to evolve?
That's the thing. I think the most important thing is to stay informed. This IBC, it's a living, breathing thing. It's constantly changing with all these ongoing amendments and interpretations by the courts. Keep your ear to the ground. Those developments, they can have a real impact on your business dealings.
So as always, knowledge is power.
Absolutely. The more you understand about how the COC works, the factors they consider, the potential pitfalls, the better equipped you'll be to navigate, all the complexities of the Indian business landscape.
And who knows, maybe one day some of our listeners might even find themselves on a COC, putting their own commercial wisdom to the test. It's been a fascinating deep dive. Thanks for sharing your expertise with us.
My pleasure. Always happy to, delve into these topics with you. It's fascinating stuff.
And for our listeners, if you want to go even deeper down the rabbit hole on this whole COSI thing, be sure to check out the show notes. We've included links to all the articles that we used for this deep dive. Until next time, happy learning.